let me unmute and turn this over to Enterprise's Nella Young, who's going to get us started. Nella?
Thank you, Donna. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I am Nella Young, and at Enterprise Community Partners, I direct our national programs to integrate culture and creativity into community development. So today we're going to hear more about these concepts and several specific examples of how 3 inspiring community developers are doing creative placemaking in their communities. So why is Enterprise investing in programs and research on creative placemaking? Enterprise is committed to equitable development. We're committed to creating well-designed, affordable homes for people of all incomes in thriving communities. There are many elements of a thriving community. Thriving communities are places where cultural identity and cultural expression are at the core. Thriving communities are places that are economically resilient. Thriving communities are places where trust is strong between the people and the organizations that call it home. So we're going to have some conversation today about this concept of creative placemaking as an intentional integration of culture, creativity, art, and design into community development, and how creative placemaking can be and has proven to be an effective way to build thriving communities. Before we launch into our conversation, there are 3 things I want you to know about that Enterprise offers to support creative placemaking in community development. And you'll see some of the links will appear in the chat panel. So 3 things. We have grants, we have an interactive web tool, and we have publications. First, for grants. We have our collaborative action grants, which are $5,000 each. These grants are for creative placemaking projects that build community agency, advance community goals, and use creative and collaborative strategies to do so. There will be 2 rounds for this grant program open in early 2018, and application dates will be posted on our website in January, so stay tuned for that. And we also have a larger grant program that we're piloting this year and next called Climate and Cultural Resilience. So we currently have 5 climate and cultural resilience grantees active now. They all received $100,000 each to invest in building social infrastructure at the same time that they're investing in physical infrastructure, such as stormwater resilience systems. So we're anticipating doing more of these grants building upon this pilot year, and you can stay tuned for that as well later in 2018. Second of all, we have our Community How-To Guides website. So this is an online library of how-to guides for doing community projects and events. These are colorful brochures. They're easy to share or print, and you can browse the other how-to guides for inspiration, and you can go on there and create your own. Third, we have a few great publications for you to check out. One is Made with Love, which is a cookbook of creative placemaking recipes featuring 8 collaborative action projects. And the other is the research project that we're going to feature today. Creative Placemaking for Community Developers is a report that features 8 reasons why to do creative placemaking, as well as 2 in-depth case studies. 3 of the people that we spoke with in the process of creating this publication are on the line today, and they're going to share more with us about the work that they have been doing. You can find both of these publications and many more on the Enterprise Online Resource Center. Finally, I want to give some thanks and recognition. I want to thank 2 of our funding partners, the Cerdna Foundation for making this research possible, and Kresge Foundation for supporting our culture and creativity programming at Enterprise. Thank you also to our panelists for your contribution to this research so far and to the conversation today. And I want to recognize our team. We have Program Associate Frederick Zindel and our Cultural Resilience Fellow, Megan Venable-Thomas. These are 2 key people at Enterprise who are leading these programs. And so if you're interested in learning more about any of these things I've quickly highlighted, please reach out to any of the 3 of us, myself, as well as Frederick and Megan, and we'd be happy to tell you more. And now I am pleased to introduce Mia Sharphie of Creative Agency. Mia is a designer, a doer, and a big picture thinker. She's known for empowering people and organizations to achieve the future they envision for themselves. Mia and her team produced the 2 publications that I just mentioned, and Mia will be moderating our conversation today. So thank you and welcome, Mia.
Hi, thanks so much, Nella. So I want everybody to take a quick moment and to think about where you stand today in your organization in terms of how you're integrating creative placemaking, not integrating creative placemaking, hoping to integrate creative placemaking into your work. Enterprise hired me to create case studies of affordable housing developers who are integrating creative placemaking into their work. We saw so much promise in arts and culture as tools to make the kind of neighborhood impacts that you're trying to make. So you're trying to build communities that are more resilient, that are more culturally vibrant, that are more economically thriving. And so our first step was to talk to community developers about the ways in which creative placemaking intersects with their work or doesn't. And one of the first conversations that we had was with Mickey Northcutt, Executive Director of Northshore CDC in Salem, Massachusetts, who you're going to get a chance to hear from later today. So Mickey told us that he believes that CDCs are perfectly situated to be doing creative placemaking because of where their work stands in between the real estate skill set and the community engagement skill set. And he also said that in particular, your skills of project management and your ability to get things done is particularly useful for making sure that creative placemaking projects happen. Now, we couldn't agree more, but as we started to talk to community and affordable housing developers, we started to hear that while you want to be integrating creative placemaking into your work, and you're hearing from funders that you should be integrating creative placemaking into your work, and many of you even told us that you've been doing this work already even before it was called creative placemaking, we also heard that in practice it can be really hard to do this work given the constraints of the development process. You face shortages of money, of time, of capacity, and they affect your ability to bring on this value add, this extra thing called arts and culture, creative placemaking. So we heard stories of organizations that got creative placemaking grants and then struggled to find the right artistic and creative partners to work with to execute their projects, or even organizations that got funding but then ended up not being able to execute the projects until the very end of their grant terms, and as a result didn't achieve the level of artistic and cultural quality that they hoped to achieve or the neighborhood impacts that they hoped to achieve at the outset of their projects. So we decided that in putting together case studies on creative placemaking for this field, we wanted to ask what creative placemaking could do for you, rather than treat it as something that is an add-on on top of the work that you're doing already. We wanted to ask, how could creative placemaking push forward the work that you're already doing in low-income communities across the country, and to ask how it could make it easier, faster, and more joyful for you to achieve your missions. So you can download the case studies at this link. We've created a short link for you so that if you want to type it into your browser right now, you can get access to them. And today we're going to give you a taste of what you can access in these case studies by sharing with you 3 ways that we see creative placemaking go to work for community developers. And we've also brought together a few community developers who we think are doing the best of the best when it comes to integrating arts and culture into their work. So today we have Dillon Bustin, who's the Artistic Director of Madison Park Community Development Corporation in Boston, Jenifer Kaminsky, who's the Director of Planning and Community Development for Push Buffalo, and Mickey Northcutt, who's the Executive Director of Northshore CDC in Salem. The first way we see community developers use creative placemaking to support their missions is by using it to build neighborhood cohesion and build trust and engagement. In the Roxbury neighborhood of Boston, Hibernian Hall was a neighborhood icon that had sat vacant for many, many years. Madison Park Development Corporation took the risk to purchase this building and to program it into an arts and community space with a ballroom that serves as a performing arts venue. In doing so, they set themselves up to embed arts and culture more deeply into their organizational culture, and they've made a multicultural arts space for the city of Boston. They've also found that they've been able to develop stronger relationships and trust with community residents that have come in handy when working on projects that might generate opposition within the community. Now imagine that instead of going to a community meeting, you would walk into a climate change dance party. That's just one of the ways that Push Buffalo integrates performance and visual art into the way that it does community organizing and engagement. Now, Push Buffalo's arts and culture programs are by the community for the community. And they use their arts and culture not just to develop stronger bonds within their community, but also to capture attention for their state-level advocacy campaigns. So now I want to invite Mickey, Jen, and Dillon into conversation and ask, starting with Jen, your organization, Push Buffalo, has a very robust community organizing arm, but there may be organizations out there that only do development. And in fact, I recently heard about a CDC that had to close down its community organizing arm because they couldn't find enough funding for it. So for organizations out there that might want to be doing more creative placemaking work, but might only be doing development at this point, what do you see as their opportunities to integrate arts and culture into their development process?
That's a great question. I think I would start with partnerships, because I don't think it's that unusual for affordable housing developers to solely focus on development work, and if doing arts and culture and organizing is maybe not a core capacity, asking a developer to immediately create that isn't always feasible. So I think there are lots of examples out there of partnerships, and even when we've partnered with some other developers, that they have used our organizing and other capacities on the ground. So I think in the neighborhoods that developers want to work, if they don't have that capacity on staff, then to reach out to other groups that maybe do, who can be brought into the process.
Yeah, and Jen, I think you've spoken a little bit about the way that Push uses creative placemaking both in an ongoing way, but also on project-specific levels. So can you describe for us how, the two ways that you guys, that you do that?
Sure, and I guess I would say even though we do have a robust organizing group and arts and culture work within the organization, we still also partner. So there are arts organizations within our neighborhoods that maybe are reaching communities that we don't have as much reach with, or they're doing, so for example, there's an arts and culture group, the WASH Project. They have very strong ties with the Burmese community in our neighborhood, so we have partnered with them on some of our arts and culture work. Similarly, the Ujima Theater Project that has deep roots within the community, and also strong theater and storytelling programs that we don't necessarily have. So in all of our work, even though we have some of those core capacities, we have also partnered with other groups who bring additional capacity. And I think what Maya was alluding to is something that we've talked about around there being thinking about engagement as being an ongoing process, so that continually we are knowing the neighborhood and the neighborhood's knowing us, but then also there's project-specific engagement that is around like, okay, now that we have been engaging for some amount of time, we now want to build a 36-unit project on these 4 lots, and what do people think about it? And so that integration of the two, so that when we come with a project-specific conversation, it's not out of nowhere, that there's a context in which people can engage with the specific project we're proposing.
Yeah, well, can you describe so let me first say that if anyone out there has questions, feel free to type them into the Q&A box. We will try to take them now, or we'll try to integrate them over the course of this conversation. So, Jen, can you describe in specific a way in which that Push Buffalo has done that?
Sure. So we have a lot of different opportunities for engagement on the planning and community development side. We have an annual community planning congress where we gather residents, often breaking them up into sort of neighborhood groups and looking at maps and identifying sites that people want to work on and do campaigns on. We also have our monthly community development committee, which is a group of board members and member leaders, because PUSH is a membership-based organization. So those are some kind of the ongoing engagement. And so then when we transition to say, okay, now we want to redevelop School 77, there's already a base of leaders who have been identifying School 77, have been thinking about School 77, so that when we go out and say, okay, we've identified this site, we have heard these particular needs and desires for that site, let's have some focused conversation around, doing charrettes on exterior spaces at School 77, or we can do some deeper conversation on what type of housing. Should it be family housing? Should it be senior housing? Should it be supportive housing? So it's those mix of those two things, so that when we start to have those deeper project conversations, there's already some trust and knowledge that's out there, and that just makes the conversation, I think, more productive and more robust.
Yeah. Well, so one of the things that we found in creating these case studies was that there seemed to be a secret sauce almost to how organizations seem to do this work most successfully. And one of those secret sauces was that organizations did work that cut across different divisions that they had, or work streams that they had. So I know that with that Community Planning Congress, that project started as a community organizing project and then was picked up by the development team. For Madison Park, Dillon, I know that your organization accesses public health grants from both the state and from local medical organizations to fund your resident services staff. So how do you integrate arts and culture into your resident services framework? And do you see opportunities to do this differently or to do this more?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I think we could certainly do more. We basically provide a venue here, and then we also provide budgets, so we try to hire as many local performers, actors, directors, designers as we can. With a topic like diet and lifestyle, we certainly cooperate with the Community Action Department to make our ballroom available for their programs, and we host community groups working in this area. For example, there's a nonprofit called the Carrot Project that was doing a series, like a 12-week series, not only on how to have an urban garden and do urban farming, but also how to start a business out of an urban garden. And this has nothing to do with the arts as commonly understood, but we made our facility available for that course and supported it as much as we could, not only with the Saturday morning and Monday evening meetings, but also the opening and closing event, which did feature performing and visual artists.
Yeah, and I know that in your work you have a performing arts program, but then and you do performances, but you also work with the community action team, and it's also about just having the asset of the ballroom. So can you speak a little bit about what opportunities have emerged just because the ballroom exists and is available that maybe Madison Park didn't plan on when they first decided to purchase and program the building, but that have become part of how you do your work?
Well, we've started having events outside the building. In other words, we might go to one of Madison Park's elderly housing complexes and work with the resident services coordinators to do an outdoor concert on that property rather than trying to persuade people to walk a few blocks to the ballroom. And that sort of collaboration has been very successful. But for us, it means taking a stage, taking a sound system, taking seating, and all the logistical challenges of doing a big outdoor event.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. There's a craft to it.
And then, in terms of the ballroom itself, we work with all those resident services coordinators to distribute free passes to the conventional arts events in the ballroom, like theater.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, so you've spoken a little bit about a project that Madison Park was working on, a supermarket development project, where there was some community opposition to the project, and how the arts programming and even Hibernian Hall played into resolving that conflict. Do you mind filling us in on what happened?
No, I think whenever there's a major development, local activists get concerned that community residents are not being able to gain the benefits of employment, not only employment in the new facility, but also employment during the building of the facility. So it's not at all uncommon. In fact, it's almost inevitable that new developments will be picketed over wage and union gatekeeping and so on. And so our real estate department developed a new supermarket for Dudley Square, where we live, and opposition to that was there, but it was relatively mild and minimal, because not only could we prove that we were paying above prevailing wages, but also we had personal relationships that would allow us to be able to, speak forthrightly and have productive conversations with the activists that were leading the picketing, and that was all due to the use of the ballroom by the local community.
Right. Yeah, I remember you saying that previously the ballroom was made open for rentals, and so you would meet people who were in for graduation parties or birthdays or other just normal day-to-day life events, and they were sharing space with you to have those life events, and so it led to development of more intimate relationships.
Yes, that's right. We would make the ballroom available for wedding receptions and anniversary parties, retirement parties, whatever sort of private event with a closed invitation list like that. But our arts program and civic needs got so overwhelming that we ended that program. And we'll be making a new community center available for those sorts of events. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But even in that realm, in the arts and culture sphere, you have to meet the clients halfway. I'll just very briefly mention that we were dealing with refugees from Somalia who wanted to have a wedding, and they were saying that back home, weddings would be at least 3 days, a day for the men, a day for the women, and a day for the actual ceremony. And we couldn't do that, but we did do an around-the-clock wedding where there were 8 hours for the men, 8 hours for the women, and then 8 hours together.
Wow. So who was on at 2 a.m.?
Right. I was.
So we've gotten a question that, and Mickey, Jen, or Dillon, feel free to weigh in on this, but we've gotten a question that some developers encounter pushback to the term placemaking because it can imply that there was no place there before, and that can be construed as negative. So do you have any advice for how to avoid that type of perception, or do you have another way that you describe this kind of work?
Well, I could say I don't use that term placemaking at all for that reason. On the other hand, what it implies to me is making a place that has a public profile that's accessible as a destination for tourists, even local people who might want to come to enjoy a restaurant or enjoy shopping. That's what placemaking means. It means a place that has an identity where they know that they'll be welcomed and feel safe.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think certainly I use placemaking when I'm talking to other planners, just because that's phrase in the lingo now, but I similarly don't necessarily use that phrase in more of the neighborhood work. And I think we view it not necessarily as placemaking to give definition to outsiders, but placemaking to highlight the existing culture that is already in place. So it is part of strengthening the neighborhood narrative of who lives here. So I'm not sure if placemaking is the right word, because again, as we've all known, it has a lot of different connotations, but in the work that we do, it's around highlighting and uplifting culture that is already in place.
And this is Mickey, and I agree with you guys, and I think also the way that we talk about this and think about it really has always been civic engagement. And you know, I think for us, what people are now calling creative placemaking, we just thought we needed to make our civic engagement work more relevant for a wider swath of people by making it, like, by doing things that were fun and creative and particularly engaging people of all ages. We felt like we were finding that our traditional means of civic engagement, like door knocking and doing more like policy-oriented campaigns, at least at a local level, were engaging the same narrow slice of people. So we really wanted to think about how do we engage small business owners who are, you know, busy and need to really see the direct value in whatever time they're spending, or young people who, you know, have grown up with smartphones, or just, you know, average older folks who find doing something creative more engaging than just going to a traditional community meeting.
Yeah,
Erin Bartley. We never use the term creative placemaking.
Yeah, Aaron Bartley of Push Buffalo, there's a quote by him in the case studies. He said, you know, community meetings, unfortunately, can sometimes just be really boring. And so we use arts and culture as a way to be more engaging, to make it exciting to want to come to these meetings. And one of their climate change dance parties, actually, Biz Marquee came to it. So so if you hang out with Push Buffalo, you get to see some high-class acts. But
he was amazing,
Mickey,
FYI.
Yeah, wait, tell us a little bit about that experience. DJ. Yeah?
Yeah, so that was a partnership with a national sustainability campaign called the Solutions Project, and so they were highlighting some of our sustainability work, and as a way of celebrating that, they did these billboards around town of some of our amazing members, but then they also threw this dance party and brought Biz Marquee, who, I mean, I was familiar with Biz Marquee, but I did not realize how amazing of a DJ he was, so that was a really, really good party. Well,
yeah, and what I'd
like to pretend that happens all the time, but we do have other parties with other really good DJs. They're just, you know, not internationally famous.
Right, and what we learned is that when you run these parties, there's a dance party, oftentimes there's a break in the middle for some kind of workshop, whether that's more community organizing oriented or some kind of educational workshop that focuses on sustainability of your neighborhood, and then there's more celebration at the end. So it's not a party on one hand and then a workshop on the other hand, in the way that you do your community engagement and organizing. The arts and culture and the fun, quote unquote, is very deeply integrated into the work, quote unquote.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think this is actually a great segue to get into the next place that we see community developers use creative placemaking. So we see them use it as an economic development strategy and as a strategy to improve neighborhood perception. Ruben Viera, who grew up in The Point, Salem's underdog neighborhood, became an internationally known street artist. Northshore CDC partnered with him to create murals that paint the identity of the neighborhood on the walls of the buildings in the neighborhood. And then they worked with Viera to develop a large-scale mural program that they call the Punto Urban Art Museum. They hope that this program will bring some of the tourist economy that Salem benefits from at large to the Point, and to encourage residents of Salem who have never crossed the few blocks to make their way into the Point to visit this this vibrant neighborhood. The Dudley Square area in Roxbury, Boston, had lost a lot of its vibrancy in the wake of urban renewal and urban disinvestment, and they hadn't had a sit-down restaurant in Dudley Square that was open after hours in 40 years, until recently when across the street, Suya Joint, an all-African cuisine restaurant, opened up. So while Madison Park did not develop Suya Joint, they see it as a success indicator of their work to rebuild a culturally and economically thriving neighborhood. They've taken this work a step further by applying with the state of Massachusetts for a cultural district designation. So, Mickey, I want to start with you. Can you walk us through how the Punto Urban Art Museum got off the ground? Because today, it's incredibly impressive. I know you have almost 30, if not more, murals across the neighborhood, but I know that a fully formed, fully funded program like this with such exposure did not just arrive on your doorstep one day with the funding attached and the artists attached. So would you mind walking us through step by step how this became a reality for your organization?
Sure. I would say it's really important that the inspiration for this was a 2013 neighborhood master plan that we worked on with the community and the city, with hundreds of residents involved, created a whole list of goals and actions that we could all collectively focus on. And a lot of those were around the more traditional things that we focus on, like economic development and job training and infrastructure improvements. But the one goal that was, I think, one of the most important but most difficult to really achieve was breaking down this invisible barrier between the Point neighborhood and the rest of the city. And the Point, like a lot of communities, is a dense urban neighborhood that's adjacent to the rest of downtown. And it was built up as a community of immigrants. For over a century, it's been home to different immigrant groups, and today it's predominantly Dominican. And all of the things that people say about communities like this have been said tenfold about both the Point and the people in the Point. And so we really thought a lot about how to deal with that stigma. And on the one hand, we wanted to make all those other improvements, but on the other, somewhat parallel, we were working with Ruben Viera, who you mentioned, and who is now our curator of the Urban Art Museum. And we thought our skills were well matched. And as we thought through what an arts district might look like, which has now morphed into an open-air museum with actually 50 murals, we thought this was the perfect opportunity to kind of leverage the assets of Salem, which has a huge tourist economy, with the assets of the Point, which is a beautiful, architecturally rich neighborhood with a really interesting culture. But there's just so much misperception on either side of that divide that we thought we wanted to do something that was beautiful and artistic and inspiring for people that are living in and growing up in the Point, but also to give people a really positive, concrete reason to cross the bridge and cross the street and actually walk down the neighborhood. And when they visit, we have seen literally hundreds of instances now through tours and events of people really having that aha moment of, wow, this neighborhood is actually like a quiet residential neighborhood, no big deal. A lot of the stigma that they may have subscribed to, I think they realized really quickly was false. But logistically, you know what? I think we were well positioned to host something like this because we have deep community roots. We have residents and small business owners on our board. We already do a number of other engagement activities and programs that gave us a deep connectivity to the neighborhood. And we also own a lot of real estate in the neighborhood, which I think is a great, unique asset that most CDCs have. And we were able to leverage the opportunity of being able to paint, not exclusively, but mostly on buildings that we own to create an arts district, really. So I think a lot of the assets that have made this possible are existing assets. our fundraising has opened up new doors. I think one thing that we found exciting about this program is that there is a whole community of donors out there, and I think this exists in most parts of the U.S., that are really interested in the arts and passionate and connect to it. And that may not be the profile of a traditional housing and community development nonprofit, but it's opened up a new avenue for us to have supporters who specifically support our urban art museum work. And they may also, we're hoping to move those folks into also supporting the body of the rest of our work. But there's been a lot of logistical challenges of creating a new program without a dedicated staff person. But it's been so well received both at the community level and the point at the community level as a whole in Salem and on the North Shore, and also increasingly with a new echelon of supporters.
Yeah. Well, so you mentioned these aha moments that people are having when they see the neighborhood in a new way. And one of the questions that we hear is this question of impact. And this is actually asked by somebody who's listening in today. So do you believe that these placemaking projects are creating an impact? How do you know? What kinds of impacts are they creating? Maybe let's start with you, Mickey, since I know that there was a big economic development strategy around this project.
Yeah, we another plan that we had, another sort of neighborhood sub-plan that we had done as a component of our neighborhood master plan was specifically a commercial corridor revitalization plan, and that was looking at how do we improve the retail offerings, how do we support the businesses that exist and encourage new ones to come in. And again, we have a lot of data quantifying the retail market there, but another significant barrier to really like significantly moving the needle was this stigma. So I think that in this case, in our case, all roads pointed for our efforts to be focused on reducing the stigma. I'll tell you, one of the things that we struggle with is how to meaningfully quantify the impact of this, but we have lots of anecdotes. So I would say one that relates to small business is there is a small sub shop that's right in the Point neighborhood, but also in the Urban Art Museum area, which is really like a 3 to 4 block radius. And he has been involved in all sorts of planning activities with us and has been supportive, but like sort of from afar, of the Urban Art Museum work. He hasn't been directly involved in it. But in seeing him when we've been giving tours, he came out one day and said, right next to his business are 2 murals that are at a kind of corner entrance to the neighborhood, so that when people coming from the rest of downtown Salem see these murals, those really are the 2 that draw people in from that part of the neighborhood. They happen to be right next to his building. And he said, since those 2 murals went up in July, I have seen an increase of at least $500 a week in sales in our restaurant. And I think, like, for us, like, that's the difference between, like, barely making it and the middle class for this guy, because he is the primary staff person in his business. He has other people part-time, but he works a lot. And that's something that's really exciting. So we're looking at how can we survey other businesses on helping us quantify things like that, so that we can look at that through an objective lens, like he told us voluntarily. And then we're also thinking about measuring things like people's perceptions of their own community. We have some of that survey work done before, and we're thinking about how to do that in the future.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So how does housing fit into all of this? Because I know that many of your organizations, their primary work is housing. How does housing fit into this larger economic development through arts and culture piece?
So, this is Mickey again. I'm happy to speak to that. I think it's absolutely integral in the case of our program here. 80% of the walls that we've had murals painted on are on affordable housing properties on the sides and backs of those properties. So it reduces the what is a really significant complication, which is access to walls. That part of it is significant. But also budget-wise, the programmatic aspect of this we've raised money for, but there are small costs associated with the actual painting that that we have been able to pay for like marginally out of project budgets. If it's like reasonably construed as a property improvement that we might otherwise have done, just not artistically, just done regularly, we've been able to make some expenses there, which is helpful in the margins. But it also allows us to think about things like lighting. Like on the buildings that we've painted on that we don't own, we can't exactly go in and then install plaques and lighting and things like that, but we're thinking through all of those things on the buildings that we own because that's just so much easier. But then the other thing that I would mention is we also have some sculpture work, and those happened on a property that was newly developed this year. And when we were planning for the renovation of a courtyard space in a large building that was got renovated, we were able to integrate into the project budget, again, very small amounts of money in the scheme of an affordable housing development, but that money went a long way in paying for the actual materials for the sculpture. So integrating art into the landscaping and painting and design budgets of housing developments is a great way for CDCs that that don't want to go out and start a whole new fundraising program to be able to do something that's interesting and cool within a project budget, as long as it's sort of a nominal amount of money.
Right. I would agree with that as well. I think also just at a base level, part of the reason that we're doing this arts and culture work is to celebrate the culture of people living in this neighborhood, so that we are also creating affordable housing, so that people have a place to live, so that we don't ultimately end up with a neighborhood that has murals and events and other arts and culture that celebrate a group of people who no longer can live there. So I think the two go hand in hand as part of a larger anti-gentrification strategy.
Yeah. Well, that's actually a pretty great transition to the last way that we see community developers integrating creative placemaking into their work. So we hear from community developers that they fear, or that the community members that they work with fear, that investing in arts and culture will invite gentrification in and will lead to long-term residents being displaced. So Aaron Bartley, who's the executive director of Push Buffalo, shared with me his thinking on a three-part strategy that Push Buffalo is using as their method of addressing gentrification and the threat of it. So the first leg of that strategy is to make sure that a significant percentage of the land is either under nonprofit, government, or long-term resident ownership. And he cites research from the Tenderloin District in San Francisco that suggests that there might be a certain threshold, like a certain percentage of land that's owned by these entities, past which it's really hard for market rate real estate interests to catalyze those runaway price effects that help them flip neighborhoods. The second part of that strategy is pushing for protections on the policy level with policies such as inclusionary zoning that protect affordable housing and pushing for additional affordable housing. And then the third leg of the strategy is to use arts and culture to proactively communicate and even to brand the neighborhood with the identities of the people who are there now. And I think this is something that Jen alluded to. And this is something that we've also seen not just in Push Buffalo's work, but in a number of projects. So a Boston Globe article said of the Punto Urban Art Museum that Northshore CDC is running, that what sets the Salem project apart is its scale and the determination that the neighborhood remain one that belongs to the people who have lived here all along. So by proactively communicating the identities and the existence of current residents and using arts and culture, real estate interests at our market rate have a harder time treating the neighborhood as a tabula rasa to be rebranded or to have a narrative that's rewritten according to a market rate real estate narrative. So I think I want to go back to Mickey and ask Mickey, what do you think about, I know you, Northshore CDC does own a fairly large amount of land within the point. So what do you think of this three-part strategy? What do you think of the role of arts and culture within it? Does it accord with the way you're doing your work, or do you think about it differently?
I would say there are three really important things as it relates to gentrification that we've thought about. I already mentioned that 80% of the walls that are painted and included are on affordable housing, and I think that's critical. That may not always be possible, but depending on the context and the community, but it's certainly a way for CDCs especially to prioritize their work. A couple of other things. There have been efforts in Salem over the years to rebrand the point because the words the point have had a negative stigma in and of themselves. And quite bluntly, our organization and me personally have always heavily resisted that because we felt like the reality of the point is actually a positive neighborhood experience for the families that live there. It's not aligned with the stigma, and we were very hesitant to try to rebrand it. And it was interesting as we started to take steps like the first couple of murals that led to the Urban Art Museum, the Punto Urban Art Museum. We actually came under quite a bit of pressure to make this project one that was more Salem focused and not specifically on the point. And we were so resistant to that because we felt like this project, the very essence of this project was to reduce stigma in the point and to bring something beautiful to this community that has not had a lot of investment otherwise outside of our work. And so that actually inspired us to the name Punto Urban Art Museum because El Punto is the Spanish name of the neighborhood. And it's fascinating that now that the Punto Urban Art Museum has taken off, I have people stopping me on the street in other parts of the city saying, "Oh my gosh, my friends were in town on the weekend and we were in El Punto." So it's great that they're seeing the museum, but the fact that they're also calling it El Punto is really like a doubling down on the really awesome, we've had a predominantly Dominican community for about 50 years. That's not showing signs of changing. And, it's an interesting art, like rebranding the neighborhood without changing the essence of it and doing it in a way that highlights the community, again, like someone else said, as it is, has been really important. And then the third thing I just want to mention in terms of artist selection, this is another really important decision for us. We have two aspects of our program. We have 30 murals that are done by the best artists in the world that are invite only. But for those, 90% of the artists we selected are Latino, and we wanted folks who would understand and really emotionally connect with the mission of the program, but also the point itself. And that was, we could talk about what that looked like for a whole nother hour, but it was a very important decision. And then the other important decision was that 20 of the walls that we have are done by local emerging artists. They're all done by artists from Salem and the North Shore. And having that, those two aspects of artist selection were really important so that we had artists who were, we didn't tell them what to paint, but we asked them to respond to the mission of the program and, the character of the neighborhood. So we got a lot of pieces that are reflective of Caribbean and Central American culture. By no means all of them are, but many of them are. And that has been a really important building block for people in the neighborhood connecting with the project.
Yeah. So to anyone who's listening out there, if you've got any questions, feel free to type them in the Q&A box. One of the questions we're getting a lot, and we get this a lot, is, isn't arts and culture too risky? Isn't it too risky in terms of gentrification, right? So let me go to Jen, because I think this three-prong approach comes from your organizations. Is it too risky to invest in arts and culture? In terms of gentrification,
So I don't think we've ever, we've certainly talked about arts and culture and gentrification, but we have always made the decision to pursue it. But I think it's pursuing it in a nuanced way and carefully. And I think Mickey had some really good points around some ways that you do that. And so looking at the piece that is currently on the screen, so that is a mural that is on our Grant Street Neighborhood Center, which is both our offices but also a drop-in youth center. And so in that, we wanted to do something. So this site is a former library that was closed down due to budget cuts, and so we wanted something that identified this as a space for youth and a space for the many youth of color and who are from all over the world who live in this neighborhood. And so we had a process where a number of artists submitted, and we ended up choosing a group of 3 young men who live on the west side of Buffalo. And part of why we chose them is they wanted to involve the youth in our youth center in creating this piece. So the hands that you see were youth from the youth center. They also wanted to work with us on the creation of the piece. So when some of the initial drafts came back with a lot of the illustrations of children playing, we asked them to include some of the, like the hula hooping and kites. We're like, that's not really what kids in this neighborhood, maybe they're doing it, but that's not, that's not exactly what they're all doing. So they were willing to work with us to create something that identified this site as a space for youth of color. And I think we have tried to do that with the various pieces that we've done. So there's another piece that was done on one of our affordable housing sites over the summer that a local artist wanted to do something celebrating the work of a documentary photographer, Milton Bergovin, who did a lot of photography of working class and of color communities. And so when Max wanted to do that piece, he came to us because he knows that we are receptive to it, and many people in the neighborhood have then come to us to express how much they really like and see themselves reflected in these artworks that have gone up. So, and I think arts and culture is not just murals and visual arts. I think it's theater pieces. It is creative events. It is roller skating parties that also have an Afrobeat orchestra playing. So it's maybe also be expansive of your definition, but I think we can have nice things in our neighborhoods without it automatically leading to gentrification.
Mm. Well, Dillon, let me ask you our last question, because I think it's actually, we're getting a question like this, and I think it's in a lot of people's minds. You're based in a much stronger real estate market than Buffalo or Salem. You're based in the Boston area. So do you think that arts and culture as a community development strategy is relevant in both strong and weak markets? And do you think it has a different role to play in strong markets than weak markets?
Well, I hesitate to be the final word here because I'm pessimistic about the ability of arts and culture programs to resist the overwhelming forces at play here in the real estate market. I just don't think that I'm willing to learn about this project in Salem and possibly a mural project of a much larger scope and scale can be more of a bastion, but the front page of the paper today had an article about a new condo that just went on the market here in Roxbury. It's on a residential street. It's one of multiple condos in an old rehab building. and it's priced at $2 million. And the average household annual income in that neighborhood is $30,000. So speaking of the overarching theme here of global climate change, this kind of churning, I think, is traceable back to climate change, which is creating so much instability around the world. So in two ways. One is you have influx of people who are essentially refugees. I mean, think of the people arriving in Boston in the past month just from Puerto Rico and Haiti and other Caribbean islands who have been walloped recently by unusual hurricane action. But also ultra-rich people in unstable parts of the world are looking for a place to park their money. And there's a very strong trend in Boston of them building luxury condos that are not occupied. There are entire buildings downtown that are full of $6 to $8 million condos that no one is living in. They're just investments. And that kind of pricing ripples out throughout all the neighborhoods and affects pricing everywhere. Mm-hmm. So to me, what we're contending with is what we do is like whistling in the wind.
Yeah. Well, I think to maybe put a more hopeful spin on what you're saying, not because I think that it's wrong, I think it's right. What we've seen in our research on creative placemaking is that sometimes it's very, very visible, but it works most often when it's part of a much larger holistic strategy that's about bringing together different components of your organization. We've seen that bringing in artists and creatives into the process long before you commission the art piece, the performance, or the mural is really good for organizations becoming innovative, staying innovative, moving forward in terms of how working creatively in a world in which there's an increasing number of constraints. And we've also seen that partnerships are incredibly important. So arts and culture and real estate development can't do it alone, but in partnership, in these alliances that are sometimes really difficult to form and to hold together, that's where we start to see that transformative change. And that's why Enterprise's Creative Placemaking Grant Program is the Climate and Cultural Resilience Program, because we see a lot of relationships between those two issues and how we can find synergy in working on each issue. And so I first want to just say thank you to the panelists for being here today, for being willing to share best practices, a look under the hood of their organizations, and their thoughts on this issue. We hope that you've enjoyed this talk today and have gotten a chance to take away at least one idea that you'll use in your organization and your work. And I want to also make a pitch for these case studies because they are incredibly short. We have kept each one under 10 pages, and they have lots of pretty photos. And we've done that in part because we know that you're really busy, and we know that you need to get the tactical and strategic information that you need to move to the next level with your organization or on your next project. And so we tried to make it easy and simple and fun to access that information. And for those of you who love Easter eggs and special surprises, here's a couple of things that you'll find in the case studies, but you have to read them to find out. So you will find out why you would ever want to host a fake bike race and what a fake bike race even is. You're going to also find out what on earth is moral site control and how you might get it on your next project. And you'll also get a chance to look under the hood of Madison Park's funding structure and how they afford to fund a project as substantive and professional as Hibernian Hall and all of its programming. And so you'll also hear about Jean Pignatto, Executive Director of MPDC's take on how they do that and how she and others position their organization in order to be able to do that. So thanks again, everyone, today for your time. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to everyone at Enterprise who's working on this issue. And grab those case studies and stay tuned for more opportunities within Enterprise on creative placemaking.